You know, when you send over this collection of material articles, transcripts, your own notes, it really, it drives home that feeling we all have now, right? There's just so much information out there.
Overwhelming, yeah.
Totally. And figuring out what's actually important, what the real takeaways are, that's the challenge. So that's what we're trying to do here for you with the deep dive, like a personalized shortcut through all that noise.
Absolutely. And what a mix of sources you shared this time. I mean, we've got these pretty deep philosophical discussions, transcripts from YouTube with thinkers like Chomsky, Zizek.
Right. The heavy hitters.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, really personal reflections about technology, culture, how things are changing, plus these focused looks at like audio technology and the big picture stuff like climate change. It's quite the range.
It really is. So, okay, our mission for this deep dive, weave all these threads together, pull out the key themes, maybe some surprising connections you didn't expect, and just give you a clearer view without, you know, drowning you in every single detail.
Exactly. A synthesis.
Yeah. And we'll touch on a lot like linguistics, philosophy, AI, VR, history, politics, economics, even personal well-being and art. So, okay, where do we even start with all this?
Well, one thing that just jumps out immediately is Noam Chomsky. He comes up quite a bit.
Right.
Obviously, there's the connection to his, foundational work in linguistics. Can't really avoid that.
Sure.
But it's also interesting seeing the discussions around his political ideas and even that mention of the debunked quote, the fabricated one about the virus origin.
Oh, right, that whole thing.
Yeah.
It's weird how even fake stuff like that can circulate and sort of reflect something. Right? Even if it's not true.
It really is. It shows the kind of authority or sentiment attached to certain figures, maybe.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about why some voices just resonate, you know. Then you've also got Slavoj Žižek in the mix.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Always provocative.
Always. And here, his views on activism and change. The observation that governments sometimes, well, they almost expect protests, maybe even want them on some level.
That's such a Žižek point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really challenges the straightforward view of protest. It makes you wonder, looking at the activism mentioned in your sources, what are the real dynamics? Is it truly disruptive or...
What does it kind of factor in? Part of the system in a weird way. Yeah. And there was a quick mention of Alain Badiou, too, another big name in that philosophical space. Suggests a real engagement with these fundamental ideas about like what's real, what exists, ontology.
Exactly. And broadening out a bit, there's also Yuval Noah Harari. A really positive take on his work, especially Sapiens, and just his ability to cover these huge sweeps of history.
Yeah, the sheer scale of Sapiens is incredible. It's almost daunting.
It is. But what's interesting is seeing that appreciation alongside, say, Chomsky. Yeah. Because they seem to come at history from different angles, don't they?
How so?
Well, Chomsky seems often focused on, like, inherent human nature driving things across time. Whereas Harari, at least in the way he's discussed here, seems to get more into the impact of specific things, art, technology shaping human development.
Huh. That's a neat contrast. Like, is it us, or is it the stuff we create that defines the story?
Kind of, yeah. Two different lenses on the human journey. And this whole discussion connects to that broader point made about philosophical trends, noting how many prominent thinkers have passed away since, 2011?
Right. It feels like a bit of a changing of the guard, intellectually speaking.
Yeah, a moment to reflect on how ideas evolve as voices shift.
Definitely. Okay, so shifting gears. Let's dive into technology. That was another huge theme. AI, especially.
Yes, AI came up a lot. And what I liked was the balanced perspective. There's an awareness of what AI can't do right now. You know, the limits in complex reasoning and genuine understanding.
Right, it's not Skynet just yet.
Not quite. But also acknowledging the real progress in areas like, say, image generation or learning patterns in music. And then the mention of specific audio AI like Vocaloid.
Yeah, AI singers, basically, which is pretty wild. But then the sources draw this really clear line between that and, say, mastering audio engineering.
Exactly. Yeah. That's framed as something deeply human, years of practice. Developing an ear. Experimenting. It's an art, not just code.
Yeah, that distinction feels important. What AI can automate versus deep human skill.
It really is. And that leads nicely into the whole deep dive on audio tech itself that was in your materials.
Oh yeah, that was a detailed.
You can tell there's a real passion there.
Yep.
Tracing the journey from, like, the iconic Walkman.
The Walkman, total game changer.
Right. To this ongoing quest for high-fidelity sound. It shows a real engagement with the experience of listening.
Absolutely. And then it gets into the weeds, like the actual limits of human hearing, which is fascinating because you hit a point where, well, how much better can it technically sound to us?
Precisely. Our ears have physical limitations, which makes the discussion about those more futuristic ideas like direct brain audio interfaces.
Yeah, that felt a bit sci-fi, maybe.
And maybe a little unsettling. The enthusiasm seemed kind of low in the sources. Like, is that a future we actually want? How wired in do we need to be?
Good question. It feels like pushing boundaries, maybe just for the sake of it. And then there was Sony's 360 reality audio.
Yes. Presented with a fair bit of skepticism, it seemed.
Yeah, like, is this solving a real problem?
Right.
Or is it just another format? Especially when you can get great sound from, good headphones or well-placed speakers.
Exactly. The feeling seemed to be that new isn't automatically better.
Yeah.
There's an appreciation for quality, definitely, but maybe not for complexity's sake.
Right, and that was underlined by the speaker mentioning getting really good results with pretty affordable headphones.
Which is a great point. Quality audio doesn't necessarily mean spending a fortune or chasing the absolute latest thing.
Sometimes simple and good is good. Okay, so from audio, let's pivot to virtual reality. Mozilla Hubs came up.
Yes, and this was genuinely surprising to me.
Why is that?
Because it wasn't talked about as some flashy new trend, but as a VR space that's actually had, like, staying power. A dedicated community that's been using it and building in it for a while.
Huh. That is interesting. You hear all the hype about the big corporate metaverse visions.
Right, which often feel kind of empty or sterile. But here's this platform, Hubs, that seems to have fostered a real, organic community. The contrast was really striking.
So it's the social element, the people, that makes these virtual worlds actually work long-term, not just the tech itself.
Seems like that's the key takeaway from that part. Technology works best when it actually helps people connect genuinely.
Makes sense. All right, now let's turn to some of the broader societal stuff, politics, economics. There were some critical takes here.
Definitely. There was commentary on U.S. foreign policy, military actions, and the perspective shared was quite critical of the outcomes.
And just to be super clear here, our job is just to report what's in the sources you sent. We're not taking sides or endorsing any specific political view, just reflecting the opinions expressed.
Absolutely crucial point. And that critical eye also turned towards the media, specifically mentioning potential bias in Australia, maybe also the U.S.
Yeah, the idea that news outlets might, intentionally or not, end up sort of echoing government lines or being selective in what they cover.
It raises those big questions about media literacy, Where do you get your information? How critical are you of it?
And I thought the point about reporting problems versus actually contributing to solutions was really sharp. Is the media just pointing fingers? Or is it helping move things forward?
It's a good question, and it connects in a way to the discussion about inequality, social, economic.
Yeah, there was a real sense of frustration coming through, particularly from a working class perspective, feeling overlooked maybe, and the analysis that political parties might lean towards wealthier interests.
It paints a picture of these significant divides in society, questions about fairness, representation. Who does the system really serve?
You can see why people feel that way based on the sources. And then on the global scale, climate change came up.
Mentioning some initial ideas about like neo-Marxist approaches, but then shifting more towards things like electric vehicles.
But even there, it wasn't simple. There was that cautionary note about the environmental impact of supposedly green tech like solar panels.
Exactly. The whole life cycle cost, the materials involved. It's a reminder that there are always trade-offs. Nothing's a perfect fix. It's complex.
No easy answers. Okay, so let's move into the more personal stuff. The sources gave this really interesting window into like an individual learning process.
Yeah, that was fascinating. This description of learning in these intense bursts of focus, jumping between really diverse interests, traditional Chinese medicine, health, media, audio tech, art, farming, history, psychology.
Wow, that's a list.
It really is. It paints a picture of just deep curiosity, wanting to explore, well, almost everything. The phrase used was something like learning a little about many things.
Kind of like building a very broad toolkit of knowledge. I like the anecdote about Bill Gates' reading speed, too.
Oh, yeah. That seemed to capture a real fascination with just absorbing information efficiently.
Like, imagine reading that fast.
Yeah.
And it ties into the approach mentioned for studying law, focusing on the core essence, the main principles, not necessarily memorizing every single detail in the textbook.
Right. Efficient learning again. Getting the gist, the important part.
Very practical. Then, on a different note, there were these interesting thoughts on housing new developments versus older houses.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about how they look. There were concerns raised about things like pollution, noise levels in these newer, maybe denser areas.
So thinking about the less obvious quality of life stuff, maybe appreciating the character or, I don't know, the established feel of older places.
Perhaps. It suggests a thoughtful take on urban living. And then we absolutely have to talk about the Saba virtual world story.
Oh, the Saba story. That was amazing. Totally unexpected.
Right. This virtual world from the 90s.
Like ancient history in internet terms.
Basically. And suddenly there's this resurgence of interest, people trying to get it running again, facing all these technical problems, servers crashing, download links getting flagged as malware.
Just the hurdles you'd expect trying to revive old tech.
Exactly. But the community was so dedicated, sharing files, figuring things out. And the best part,
What?
they discovered a working whiteboard feature from the original 1990s version. Still functional.
No way. That's incredible. It's like digital archaeology.
It totally is. It's this perfect blend of nostalgia and like the surprising durability of these online communities. People connecting over these shared niche digital pasts.
Yes, that's actually really heartwarming. Shows how these online spaces can create lasting bonds. Amazing.
Okay,
finally, let's quickly touch on art and culture.
Yeah, there was a really broad sense of what counts as art, manga, photography, video, very inclusive.
Which is cool, not gatekeeping art. And then the personal connection to Japanese culture really shone through.
Definitely. Learning the language, watching Japanese dramas, and the explanation of Fushado.
Right, the way of the pinwheel. I wasn't familiar with that.
Me neither. Described as this personal artistic practice inspired by a TV show character, it's such a unique, specific thing.
And the most surprising part.
An online community actually grew around it, around this very niche personal interest.
Seriously, that just goes to show, doesn't it? You put something out there, however specific, and sometimes it finds its people.
It really does. The internet enables connection around almost anything.
So wrapping this deep dive up, it's clear, looking back over everything, that your sources reflect this incredibly curious, multifaceted mind. You know, the learner really fits.
Absolutely. We went from Chomsky and Zizek to AI limitations, 90s virtual worlds, Japanese pinwheels.
Yeah.
Quite the journey.
And what's fascinating, I think, is seeing the links, how philosophical ideas might shape political views, how tech influences art, and even revives old social spaces.
It all interconnects, doesn't it? It's not neat little boxes.
Not at all. So maybe a key takeaway here is just the sheer value of staying curious, of constantly learning and being open to all these different perspectives. Your own journey, as reflected in these sources, and even that Saba story, they really exemplify that.
Yeah. And perhaps that leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given this huge landscape of information and these passionate communities popping up around even the most niche things, what forgotten corner or overlooked interest in your own life might hold the next surprising insight, or maybe even a new, unexpected connection?
Great question to end on. Thank you so much for sharing these incredibly rich sources with us and for coming along on this really fascinating deep dive.
My pleasure. Until next time.
See you then.